Good morning, Dr. Brown. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us way out from the Pacific Coast. It's not too early, but it's earlier than it is here for sure. I want to thank you for
Absolutely.
giving me some time this morning. I'm Lawana Brown. I'm a nurse with Regis and teach for them and do lots of exciting things, including having conversations with great nurses. So I'm grateful to be able to talk to you this morning. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're doing now as far as your work, and then we'll kind of see where things go from there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's a pleasure to meet you and be here today. So my name is Garrett Chan. I am the president and CEO of HealthImpact, which is the California Nursing Workforce and Policy Center. I've been the CEO of HealthImpact since January of 2019. And prior to that, I held quite a few different senior nursing executive roles at Stanford Healthcare at Stanford University. I had positions such as the Director of Education and Professional Development, the Director of Advanced Practice, and I was also the first nurse scientist for the health system. And so it was really a wonderful opportunity to grow up in a great health system like Stanford. I also am on faculty at the University of California, San Francisco. I did have a salaried faculty position for many years in the master's and the PhD programs. And now I am an associate adjunct professor in the School of Nursing. So I teach health policy, and I also do some clinical work as well. So
Mm.
it's really
Sounds like
exciting to
you
be
sound
here
like a
with you.
busy person. Like
We
most
all are very
nurses.
busy people and have
Yes,
many
you're
hats, right?
you're exactly right. Well, tell me this. I'm always interested to know how you got to be a nurse. Why nursing? Why did you choose nursing? Particularly, I will tell you that you're only the second male nurse that I've had a conversation with. The first was Bradley Bigford. It was a very great conversation, and I'm always interested to know why nursing is a female dominated field pretty much still. So tell me a little bit about where that started and what your educational path was like for that.
Well, thanks for the question. And I have to go back and actually listen to Bradley's, presentation because I'd love to hear more about him. Um, so I'll be honest with you, my path into nursing is, I would say, non-traditional. But I will tell you that, in my opinion, it really goes to the power, it will speak to the power of mentorship and guidance. So after high school, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. So I enrolled in the local community college. And I started taking some classes in the humanities and art history. And I really got interested and intrigued by art and art history. And so I was going along and I was taking my classes thinking, I'd like to be a curator for a large museum like the
Mhm.
Met. And so at the end of the second year of this particular community college, we were required to see a career counselor if we weren't transferring or graduating. And so I wasn't ready to transfer or graduate because I was enjoying my time in college too much. And so I went to my appointment and I sat down, and the woman across the desk from me was, now, mind you, I'm probably, what, 19 or 20 years old now.
Mhm.
She seemed like she was probably 80, but more like she was 60. She was tan, tan, tan with a bunch of wrinkles, super white hair pulled up tight in the bun. And so I'm sitting down next across the table, the desk from her, and she asks, "What do you want to do?"
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, not at all what I was expecting. But
Mhm.
had I looked now back, probably as a nurse looking at doing an assessment on her, I'd probably see tar on her fingers.
Right.
And
So you know the voice would have been a smoker's voice. Yes.
right,
Right.
exactly. But I said, I was shocked. And so I said, oh, well, I want to be a curator of a large museum. And she said in the smoker's voice, and I won't continue just for clarity, she said, there are no jobs. So, oh, she said, and you need to get a PhD in order for you to get a job in any of the big museums. And I'm thinking, well, I'm just going to get my bachelor's degree and I am not going to get my PhD. And so I just want to get out into the workforce. And I said, oh, So she looks at me and she asks, do you like people? Wait, I like people. People are fine. Then she asks, do you like science? And I remember this so clearly because I thought, did you look at my transcript before I showed up? And I recalled my experience in high school, and my high school chemistry and biology teachers were these phenomenal, phenomenal people. Super interesting, super fun, made learning really great and interesting. And I thought, well, sure, I like science. And so she asks me, how about a nurse? And I thought, Now, my father was an optometrist with Kaiser, which is a very large health system out here in the West Coast. I remember my sister and I visiting him after school sometimes, and the nurses were these nice ladies, and they would stamp papers. I don't know, for those people who remember the addressagraphs, the purple ink roller. Like, I can stamp papers and be nice to people. Sure. So she leans over in her desk drawer and she pulls out this goldenrod piece of paper, and it has probably 9-point font, full, front side and back side. And on one side it described nursing, on the other side it described all the classes that I had to take. Wow. And I looked at the list of classes and I'm thinking, I don't have one class on this,
you got to start from scratch.
I'm like, okay. So because I had already been there for 2 years, I kind of had more seniority of status to get my classes. And so I was lucky that I got all my classes, with the exception of statistics.
Okay.
And I applied to, I think 4 or 5 different California State University schools. And I got into San Jose State, into their BSN program. And I was super happy because that was my first top school that I wanted to go to. And they said, well, congratulations, you got into the nursing program. However, you have to take classes in residence for a year because our program is impacted. And it is going to take some time for you to actually get up into the queue to start taking classes. And so given that I only had to take statistics, and I had taken 4 years of high school Spanish and 2 years of college Spanish because my dad said, I really wanted to take French, but my dad said, nobody speaks French in California.
Right. Yeah, your dad is right. Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, well, I really want to. So I took, 2 years of advanced college Spanish, but 2 years of beginning French. And I thought, you know what, I want to learn nursing in French. And so I applied to the international program through the California State University, and they happened to find me a nursing program at the University of Montreal, which is the largest French-speaking university outside of France.
Wow.
And so I packed up my bags, I headed on to Montreal. All my classes were in French, all my patients were in French. Now, I'll tell you, 2 years of college French are really about travel French, and it wasn't about psychology or diabetes or
that's right. Yeah, you know how to order at a restaurant, but not how to order meds or anything.
Exactly. So I went and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna just do this. And I think the follies of youth, and I did it. And I will tell you, I got all C's and 1 B, but I felt really good about it because
in French, I would feel awesome about that. Those were probably the equivalent of A's if you had done them in English, for sure, Garrett.
Right. And and I'm going to say this last part about my journey into nursing before talking about my educational preparation. But my very first patient that I took care of was on a med-surg unit in Montreal, and it was a patient who had his 7th heart attack.
Wow.
And but he was, in rehab and, on the floor, med-surg floor, and I was taking care of him, and I picked him up on Monday as my patient. He was going to be my patient for as long as, he was going to be there. And we had really intensive blocks, so I was there every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so Monday, got to know him, really nice guy. Had no family. He had one niece who lived kind of on a bit far away from where we were. No children. His wife had died previously. And so we started talking, and I was doing all my things that I do as a good nursing student, doing
Mm-hmm.
vital signs and doing patient education about heart failure and things like that. So goes well until Wednesday. And Wednesday he says to me, I don't think I'm ready to go, meaning being discharged.
Right.
And so me, nursing student, my very first patient that I'm taking care of. Oh no, the doctors say you're fine. You're going to be ready for discharge on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to do all your discharge teaching and get you ready to go. And, but you're going to be fine. So he's like, okay, come back on Thursday. He's like, I really don't think I'm ready to go. I just don't feel I'm ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
The doctors say that you're ready to be discharged tomorrow, and I'm calling your niece and she's going to come and pick you up, and I've done like 5 things on my checklist of 10 things, and you know what,
Mm-hmm.
we're moving right along.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he's like, okay. So I come in on Friday, and he said, in the morning, my, AM care, I'm doing a bed bath. He's like, I just want to thank you for taking care of me. And I said, oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so great. I mean, I'm my first patient. And
Mm-hmm.
he's like, but I really am not sure about going. I said, well, you're supposed to be discharged at 11 o'clock. And so, let's talk about it when your niece comes. So that was like at around 7:30 in the morning. And so a classmate of mine needed help. And my patient's room was the very first room on the left-hand side of the nurse's station. It was a long corridor. And my friend who was in nursing school needed help. And so her patient was farther along down the hall. And so I remember walking down the hall and looking into my patient's room, and the patient was lying on his side and looking out the door. And I remember waving to him as I was walking to my friend, and no response. So I go and help my friend, and I think, that's weird. He's very usually interactive with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I walk back and I walk into his room, and I realize he's not breathing.
Oh my.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So I check his pulse, no pulse. And so I run out of the room. I grab my nursing instructor. Now I'm like, how do I say all of this in French that my patient is coding?
Right.
So my clinical instructor rushed in with me. We started CPR. I walked around on the other side of the bed. She did the things that you have to do, right? Lay the bed flat, put the hard headboard
Right.
underneath the patient for CPR. I'm pushed against the wall, and I'm like, I have nothing. So I start doing mouth to mouth on this patient, because that
Mm-hmm.
was what we did in the 1990s,
Exactly.
right? So I was giving him mouth to mouth. The code team comes in. She gives them report again because her French is much better than mine. And then they call the code and they pronounce him dead.
Wow.
And I remember so clearly that my clinical instructor, she was debriefing with me and she said, we need to call the niece. And so I said, okay. Now she lived probably an hour away and it was around 9 o'clock in the morning, And so I said, I'll call her. And so I called her, and again, in my 2 years of college French, 3 years of college French now, I tell her and I give her the news
Mm-hmm.
that her uncle had died, and that I would wait for her to come in. And it was very meaningful for me. It was meaningful because I felt that it was my job to help support the family in this
Mm-hmm.
very difficult time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's because of that experience that launched me into my scholarship career, which is palliative care in emergency situations.
Wow.
And, and it's these, I think, Dr. Brown, just to, summarize this very long story, I
Mm-hmm.
apologize for taking so
No,
long.
please don't apologize. It sets, I mean, it sets the tone for your, trajectory. So that definitely is major.
Yeah, it really led me to think, how can we do things differently? How can we do things better?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that we need to fix um, in the healthcare system, and how can we support nurses better?
Yes.
So, reason why, partly the reason why I'm here.
That is amazing. And that story just goes to show how things that happen along the way can have that effect. And you don't forget that patient. I think we all have, a story that one of my background's labor and delivery. And I remember the moment I decided to be a nurse practitioner because of a particular patient, and what happened with that patient. So I'm really glad that you shared that. And it's interesting too, Garrett, because the time that we're in now with COVID, has really revealed lots of things that we need to do better. So I know that one of the reasons that we're able to even talk is because you found a way to do something better. You were recognized as one of the Johnson and Johnson nurses that caused disruptive change in a great way, and that was because of VAX Force. So tell me a little bit about how that came to be and what actually the function and everything was of VAX Force.
Great, thank you. So, one of the things as we were struggling in 2020, right, that I realized, and I tend to be a systems thinker, and conceptual thinker, like what's going on in this situation, and what are the issues or problems that we're experiencing, both within the profession as well as within patient community, the community at large. Um, and how can we as nurses disrupt the system to make things different and change things for the better?
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, COVID, the COVID pandemic has really unroofed the underlying issues that we've always known have existed,
Yes.
and has brought them to the forefront in a very acute and meaningful way. And I'm thankful in some ways for this opportunity so that we can actually dig deeper than what we were doing before, which was basically glossing over or giving, minimal resources to address huge systemic and deep-rooted issues.
Well stated. I need to write that whole thing down when I watch this again because that is perfectly stated, Garrett.
Thank you. And so as we were entering, the pandemic in the summer of 2020 last year, I really, and there was a bit of downtime, right? We in California, we were shut down. The governor was
Mm-hmm.
trying to protect the public health. And so there were periods of downtime, not a lot of periods of downtime, but there were periods
Mm-hmm.
of downtime. And I started thinking, what is the future trajectory of this pandemic? We know that there will be a vaccine that is going to be created at some point in time in the future. Okay, so what does that actually mean? We already see that our communities of color and under-resourced communities like inner cities, whether they are, communities of color or not, under-resourced communities, they're not going to have the access that the people who have health insurance will have.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's a distribution issue, right? The larger urban areas will get more of the resource and the rural areas are going to get less of the resource. And it's just the nature of the world.
So true.
Right. And so I thought, okay, so what are going to be the issues of the vaccine rollout? The first bottleneck that I foresaw was that you're not going to have enough, right? There are billions of people in the world. There are close to 300, what is it? 450 or 480 million people in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're not going to be able to get, that many doses all at once. So the first bottleneck was going to be supply. Mm-hmm. Okay, what is my role in supply? Well, I have really no role in supply. That is dependent on the pharmaceutical companies.
Exactly.
Right. The second, and with supply comes distribution, right? So first bottleneck was supply and distribution. Okay, I don't have any influence over that. So we're going to have to work with the system that we have. But the second bottleneck that I was foreseeing was we're not going to have enough healthcare providers in the right places to administer the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, that's something that I can do because HealthImpact as the California Nursing Workforce Center, it's like, okay, how do I mobilize the workforce so that we can get out and administer these vaccines? And then the third bottleneck during this whole vaccine rollout was the concept of laggards or people who are resistors. Mm-hmm. One theory that has heavily influenced my thinking, my scholarship, and even my work in general is, I'm not sure if you or your audience have heard of Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovations theory.
Mm-hmm. I haven't.
So Everett Rogers, yeah, 1962-ish, not a nurse. But basically he said that, we imagine any population as being a bell curve. And on one end of the bell curve, you're going to have the innovators. And then from there, you're going to have the early adopters.
Oh,
and then from there, you're going to have the early majority. And then you're going to have the late majority. And then about 16% of your population-ish is going to be the laggards or the resistors.
Yes. Okay. Yes, this is coming back to me now.
Excellent. And so I was thinking, okay, well, we're going to get through the majority, and we're going to then, the third bottleneck to achieve herd immunity is going to be the resistors or the laggards. And so I thought that's going to be the third bottleneck. And so as I was trying to think and foresee what was happening from a strategy and a policy perspective, that was kind of what I was envisioning. And, luckily, sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. And fortunately, I was somewhat right. And I thought, okay, well, let's then start working on getting vaccinators to where we need them. And so that was the genesis of VaxForce, which was to bring together a volunteer workforce of interprofessional healthcare providers, as well as students in all of the professions, to be able to be deployed at vaccination events with a particular emphasis on underserved, under-resourced, and communities of color. And so we were working very closely, the team who launched VaxForce, worked with departments of public health. How can we get 100 doses? How can we get 200 doses? So small, aliquots of vaccine, and how do we get that out into the community? And I'm so proud to say that I think to date, we've done close to 40 vaccination events. Almost all of them have been in communities of color, and all of them have been in CDC, there's the CDC Social Vulnerability Index uh, areas of the country. And so, and about 48% of our recipients are Latinx. We have about 20% Black African American, about 9 or 10% Asian. The rest are either white or people who report mixed race.
Wow.
And so it's been really, and over 5,000 doses have been administered with, I think it's been 220 volunteers from, all different disciplines.
Well, that is wonderful. And it's good to see those outcomes. I love that it brought everybody together because, here in South Carolina, we have lagged. We just, and I mean last night, hit 50% vaccination for the state. So we're behind. We're happy. I was like, yes, finally, because we were at 30-ish forever. But I think one of the things we've seen is that we haven't had an entity like that. I work for another school here that has a school of medicine, and they were doing some things. The School of Pharmacy here for the university I work for here developed the saliva testing. So they were doing different little things. And we also have some vaccination going on in the pharmacies and things. But I think being in communities in small, that definitely would have been key. The county I'm from is a very rural county, less than 20,000 folks there, mostly brown-skinned folks. And so, having something at a church where you can give out 100 vaccines on a Saturday is the kind of things that we needed, And so I'm pleased to see, which California is always at the head of things. And obviously it's because people live out there like you that are innovators and change agents. And so that is wonderful. So as far as vaccination rates, I know you all are way up ahead of where we are now. What is the work looking like now? Has it changed from the beginning when you started with VaxForce?
Yes, it has changed. Now we've kind of added an additional program to VaxForce. It's pretty easy to get a vaccine these days. We do still have areas of that don't have real access. And so, but what has happened is that we've shared our experience and with other community-based organizations. And I think that that's one of the important parts to also call out. To your point, Dr. Brown, around working with churches and working with trusted community leaders and organizations or houses of worship, because people will listen to the pastor or they will listen to the community-based organization, whether it's a United Way funded organization or a service agency. That's the thing, is having the cultural humility, and I'm not saying necessarily American versus other cultures, but knowing the local and the micro cultures in that area and working with trusted collaborators is really essential. And so we've continued that work and really have wanted to support and cultivate more of those relationships with the community-based organizations, because last night we just did our soft launch of the program, a new program within VaxForce called Trust a Nurse, Ask a Nurse.
Wow.
And we have created a telehealth program called Ask a Nurse Live, which is a free service. And we are starting to call for nurse volunteers to help staff this free telehealth service. And the concept is that when we look at people who are unvaccinated, we have a wide range of different reasons, right? on one end, we have the anti-vaxxers and the conspiracy theorists. And frankly, that is outside of my area of expertise, and I'm not sure if I want to spend any time or attention with that group.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because as a nonprofit organization, we only have so many resources, right? And there are other people who
Exactly.
are perhaps better suited and equipped to take that on. But we also, all the way to people who are questioning or unsure or afraid. And on the other anchor, in my opinion, of the spectrum of unvaccinated are people who have, first and foremost, emotions, confusion, distrust, um, fear, uncertainty. And so that group is the group that we can probably help support.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know, again, in the philosophy of VaxForce, is that if you are, let's say, part of Kaiser, again, a big health system, a closed HMO, as a Kaiser patient, you can just call up a nurse,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if what happens to people and what resources are available to people who are uninsured
Mm-hmm.
or people who have Medicaid, and in our state we call the Medicaid equivalent Medi-Cal.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get an appointment. It's hard to connect with somebody. And so what we're doing is we're working with our community-based organizations, and we're going out and saying, if you have community health workers who are out in the community or promotores, and if they have some questions that they can't answer and they need a health professional, a nurse, to talk and figure out what are some of the issues and what are some of the reassurances that nurses can give, because we're the most trusted profession by the Gallup poll for the past 20 years. Why don't we just call up? And so it's a one click. Well, it's not one click, it's like 7 clicks, but it's still like, okay, let's just go to askthenurse.live. We'll click on it and we will be able to face-to-face talk with a nurse who
Great.
can give us information, who can give us reassurance, who can use motivational interviewing techniques these are all patient education, motivational interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
These are the skills of nursing, right? The
Yes.
competencies of nursing. And so last night we did our first launch. We had 3 people show up over, which is great. We're open from 4 to 7 p.m. Initially. And then as the program gets
Mm-hmm.
bigger, we'll have more hours of service. And it went well. And it's, again, free. And it's by nurses, for nurses, and for the community at large, especially under-resourced communities. And I'm really excited to see
That is
what happens next.
exciting. That's exciting. I mean, I hope that's a model that we can see repeated other places, because it sounds to me like you've taken what I call the doorknob conversation. In nursing, we always know that we have this doorknob conversation. So the doctor's been in, he's laid out all the science, he's told them everything, and he asks, do you have any questions? And they say no, and he walks out, and then you head for the door, and as soon as you touch the doorknob, they have a question, because there's something about hearing it from the nurse in a different way of communication that makes it completely different. So I think you found definitely a good space to have that conversation with folks. So I'll be interested to see. I'm going to have to go online so I can see, how that develops. I did go on and look at the HealthImpact website, and I'll tell you what impressed me the most is that you all have resources out there for students. That I thought were really impressive. And one that I really liked was this tool for understanding the clinical experience during crisis. And the clinical experience changed completely when COVID came, because all of a sudden nobody wanted students. We had to come up with simulations. I know the program that we teach in, we had not had that. We had to come up with that. There were some that had opportunities to go to a shot clinic that, was being set up, and how did we look at that? So I love the student tool portion that you have. So I think that that's great. It's something that I'm going to pass on as well to my colleagues, because this is a thing we didn't know it was out there. A lot of times we're recreating things, and I'm like, somebody's already doing this. And this is the beauty of the conversations I've had with nurses from all across the country, in this particular series, is that we have so many tools that are out there that we can share with each other, and be able to use. So I want to close by asking you what is next for you on the horizon. I know from working with nurses that are innovators and thinkers that inside your head, you probably have a corkboard of ideas, of little things that you have. I know I have one in there of things that you've kind of pinned away as this is the thing that I see myself doing. Is there something that's out there that we can look forward to on the horizon for you, Garrett?
Well, thanks. You're very kind with your compliments. So I just, part of being a leader is to be an innovator, right? Also, part of being a leader is to put your head down and get the work done. So sometimes it's very kind of you to acknowledge my contributions, because sometimes I just forget to look up and to look back and to see, oh, we have made a difference. Because there's something, if we always are looking forward, it's hard to sometimes look backward. So I appreciate the acknowledgement, because I think I've forgotten that I should look back on occasion to, think this actually made a difference. So, but I do have some things on the horizon. One of the things, as we know, again, from a workforce perspective, is the concern that I have about nurses, both the mental health, but also professional health.
Yes.
And how do we help shore that up? And I'm going to say this, and it may come across critical, but it's not meant to be critical at all. It's perhaps a critical analysis. Is that I fully support the need to have kind of personal development opportunities and education, like mindfulness, meditation, food, and exercise, right? I'm all for that. I believe in that. And I also think that that's in some ways blaming the victim. Like, there are external factors here, and we need to think about what are those external factors that are leading to burnout and moral distress of nurses. And we need to focus a lot more on those external factors, in my opinion. And so as we think about this, there are workplace issues, right? How does a clinical agency or a place of employment help support, or really not support, or create, unhealthy work environments, right? That needs to be addressed. But we've also known that for a long time.
Yes.
This is not new. So what are some of the other things that we need to start thinking about? And, nurses have struggled with, workplace, unhealthy work environments, right? Again, not new. So what is the addition that has tipped nurses over the edge? And I really do believe that it's some of the societal factors that are playing a significant role in nurses not being well. The politicalization of the narrative, the anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorists, and the effect that has on the population. So again, we know that COVID has unroofed the issues around unhealthy work environments. We need to now do more of that. Again, we've known unhealthy work environments. The American Association of Critical Care Nurses back in the 1990s have been talking about healthy work environments. Again, not new. So what is the new? And that's kind of the next step for me, is how do I analyze what is actually happening that is not new? And how do we bring attention to the things that are not new? And how do we address those issues?
Right. That is such a profound thing to think about. And you're right, it's been there all the time. There are cracks that have been in the foundation for years. And now this major event has come through and we can see that. So I join you in looking forward to the future and in having conversations like this, not only with us, but also with the other players at the table and for the community at large. You know, one of the things my hope is from these conversations is that some of the public will also get to see a different side of nurses and to see as well that there's a lot that they are carrying in a burden. You know, some people, I had one person tell me in the hospital one time that I was doing a task that was really, you know, tiring for this patient. And a family member said to me, "Oh, well, that's what you make all the money for." And I thought to myself, do you really feel that financially this money is compensating for some of the things that we have to, you know, that you have to deal with? That to me was disjointed. So some feel like, oh, you're making more money. And in some ways, that's the response we've gotten from the hospitals. Now they'll pay nurses exorbitant amounts of money to work in these units, when in reality, there are other issues that need to be addressed and other things that need to be addressed, because you and I both know that there's some things they can't pay us enough money to do. And there's also some things that we carry with us beyond that, that the paycheck or the funds can never, you know, take away that. And I think about all that we'll see in the nurses on the mental health side, even coming out of this pandemic, you know, and how we need to address that. So I really am glad to know that you're thinking about it, because you've come up with some other great solutions. So we're going to be looking towards that. But I thank you most sincerely for talking with us this morning, for sharing with us some of your memories and recollections, for the candid approach that you had. I really appreciate that. It's hard to do with somebody you haven't met, but I think that what does bind us is that we're part of the nursing family. So there are things that we know in a different way than anybody else might. So I appreciate that so much, Garrett. And I do wish you, Vax Force and Health Impact, and all the nurses out there in California the best in this fight that we have ahead of us, and also in continuing to shore up the profession. So thank you so very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was such a fun way to get to meet you, and I look forward to future conversations.
Sounds great. Take good care. Bye-bye.
You too. Best wishes to you and your family.
Thank you.